I never thought my own sister would steal my wedding dress and sell it online for drug money. But when my FBI agent husband discovered what Diana had done, he didn't just get my dress back. He made sure she faced the full weight of federal law. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Yessa, and this is the story of how family betrayal led to justice being served in ways my sister never saw coming. The morning light filtered through the sheer curtains of my bedroom in Beaverton, Oregon, casting a warm glow across the hardwood floors that Marcus and I had refinished together last spring. I stood before my full-length mirror, holding my morning coffee and admiring the way the sunlight highlighted the delicate lace details of my grandmother's wedding dress hanging on the closet door. In 3 weeks, I would walk down the aisle wearing that same dress, just as my mother had 30 years ago, and her mother before that. The dress was more than fabric and thread. It was a family heirloom that carried the love stories of 3 generations of women in my family. The intricate beadwork had been hand-sewn by my great-grandmother in 1952, each pearl carefully placed during long winter evenings in her small apartment above the family bakery. The silk had aged to a perfect ivory, and despite being over 70 years old, the dress remained timelessly elegant, with its sweetheart neckline, fitted bodice, and flowing train that seemed to float like a cloud. Marcus emerged from our ensuite bathroom, already dressed in his crisp white shirt and dark suit, his daily uniform for the FBI field office downtown. Even after 2 years together, I still felt my heart skip a beat when I looked at him. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his strong jawline clean-shaven, and his green eyes held that same intensity that had first attracted me during a coffee shop encounter that felt like destiny. "Still can't believe you're marrying me," he said with that crooked smile that made my knees weak, wrapping his arms around my waist from behind as we both gazed at the dress. "Neither can I laughed, leaning back against his chest. "A small-town art teacher landing an FBI agent? My students think I'm living in a movie." Marcus chuckled, pressing a kiss to the top of my head. "Your students clearly have good taste in entertainment." He glanced at his watch, a sleek silver piece his father had given him when he graduated from Quantico. "I need to head out soon, but first, coffee with the future Mrs. Rodriguez?" We sat at our small kitchen table, the same one we'd found at an estate sale in Lake Oswego 6 months ago. Marcus had refinished it himself, sanding away decades of wear to reveal the beautiful oak grain beneath. It was moments like these that I treasured most. Quiet mornings before the day pulled us in different directions, him to federal investigations, and me to my 8th grade art classes at Roosevelt Middle School. "Diana's coming over tonight to help with the final dress fitting," I mentioned, stirring cream into my coffee. "Patricia wants to make sure everything's perfect for the ceremony." Marcus's expression shifted slightly, a subtle change that I'd learned to recognize over our time together. In his line of work, he'd developed an instinct for reading people, and I could tell something about my sister didn't sit right with him, though he'd never voiced his concerns directly. "That's nice of her," he said carefully. "How's she been lately?" I paused, considering his question. Diana had always been the wild child of our family, the one who tested boundaries and pushed limits while I colored inside the lines. At 28, 2 years younger than me, she still hadn't found her direction in life. She dropped out of Portland State University 3 times, cycled through jobs in retail, food service, and briefly as a real estate assistant. Her relationships were equally unstable, a parade of boyfriends who seemed to enable her worst impulses rather than encourage her best qualities. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. "She's been Diana," I said with a slight shrug. "You know how she is. Always has some new plan or scheme that's going to change everything. Last month it was starting a jewelry business. This month she's talking about getting her real estate license again." Marcus nodded, but I could see the wheels turning in his investigative mind. "And Robert? Is he still in the picture?" Robert Chen was Diana's latest boyfriend, a man in his early 30s who claimed to work in import-export, but never seemed to have concrete details about his business. He drove an expensive car that seemed beyond his apparent means, and always had cash but never seemed to work regular hours. Marcus's law enforcement instincts had immediately flagged Robert as someone worth watching, though he'd kept his suspicions to himself out of respect for my family relationships. Unfortunately, yes, I admitted. I don't understand what she sees in him. He gives me the creeps with his shifty eyes and the way he's always looking around like he's planning something. But Diana insists he's just misunderstood. We finished our coffee in comfortable silence, each lost in our own thoughts about the day ahead. Marcus gathered his badge, gun, and briefcase, the tools of his trade that reminded me daily of the dangers he faced. Federal law enforcement wasn't just a job for him. It was a calling that came from a deep sense of justice instilled by his father, a retired police officer who'd served the community for 30 years. Before leaving, Marcus cupped my face in his hands and kissed me softly. "I love you, future wife," he said, his green eyes serious and tender. "I love you too, future husband," I replied, straightening his tie with practiced familiarity. After Marcus left, I stood in our kitchen, surrounded by the organized chaos of wedding planning. Stacks of vendor contracts covered the counter, sample invitations were scattered across the breakfast bar, and my laptop displayed multiple browser tabs with seating charts, menu options, and timeline schedules. In 3 weeks, our backyard would be transformed into a garden paradise, where we'd exchange vows in front of 50 of our closest family and friends. The planning process had revealed interesting dynamics within my family. My mother, Patricia, had thrown herself into the preparations with the enthusiasm of someone planning a royal wedding. She'd taken charge of flowers, coordinating with vendors, and ensuring every detail met her exacting standards. My father, though more reserved, had quietly handled the financial aspects and logistics with his typical methodical approach. Diana, however, had been strangely absent from most of the planning process. She'd show up for the fun parts, cake tasting, venue tours, dress shopping, but disappeared when it came to actual work or responsibility. I had initially attributed this to her free-spirited nature, but as the wedding approached, her lack of investment began to feel more like disinterest or even resentment. I drove to Roosevelt Middle School through the familiar streets of our neighborhood, past the coffee shop where Marcus and I had first met, past the park where we'd had our first real conversation, past all the landmarks of our relationship. Teaching 8th grade art was more than a job for me. It was my passion and purpose. There was something magical about watching 13-year-olds discover their creative voices, seeing their faces light up when they successfully mixed the perfect shade of blue or completed their first serious charcoal drawing. My classroom was my sanctuary, filled with student artwork covering every available wall space, shelves lined with supplies organized by color and medium, and large windows that provided natural light for our projects. I'd spent years creating an environment where students felt safe to express themselves, to take creative risks, and to develop confidence in their artistic abilities. "Miss Patterson, are you really getting married to an FBI agent?" asked Zoe, one of my brightest students, as she worked on her watercolor landscape. "I am," I smiled, adjusting the angle of her paper to catch better light. "In 3 weeks, actually." "That's so cool," chimed in Jake from across the room. "Does he have a gun and everything?" "He does," I confirmed, "but his job is more about investigating crimes and protecting people than anything dramatic you see in movies." The day passed quickly, filled with lessons on color theory, individual critiques of student projects, and preparation for our upcoming art show. Teaching had always been my anchor, providing stability and purpose that balanced out the chaos of daily life. My students kept me grounded, their honest perspectives and unbridled creativity reminding me why art mattered in the world. During my lunch break, I called my mother to confirm the evening's plans. Patricia's voice carried that particular blend of excitement and stress that had become her default mode since we'd announced our engagement. "Diana should be there by 7, she said, and I could hear papers rustling in the background as she consulted her meticulously organized wedding binder. "The seamstress from Elegant Bridal will arrive at 7:30 for the final fitting. We need to make sure the hemline is perfect and that the bustle points are properly marked." "Sounds good, Mom. Is there anything specific you need me to do before tonight?" "Just make sure you eat something beforehand. You know how these fittings can run long, and I don't want you getting lightheaded." Oh, and wear the undergarments we selected. The seamstress needs to see how everything sits together. After school, I stopped by the grocery store to pick up ingredients for a simple dinner. The familiar routine of selecting fresh vegetables and planning a meal felt grounding after a day of managing adolescent energy and creativity. I chose ingredients for my grandmother's chicken piccata recipe, something comforting and nourishing that would prepare me for the evening's activities. At home, I changed into comfortable clothes and began cooking, letting the familiar motions of chopping, seasoning, and sautéing calm my mind. The kitchen filled with the aroma of garlic and lemon, scents that always reminded me of family dinners at my grandmother's house when Diana and I were children. Those memories were bittersweet now. Diana and I had been inseparable as children, despite our 2-year age difference. We'd built elaborate blanket forts in our shared bedroom, created elaborate games in the backyard, and spent summer afternoons reading together in the hammock our father had strung between 2 oak trees. Somewhere along the way, as we grew into teenagers and then adults, we'd drifted apart. Our values, priorities, and life choices had taken us in different directions, but I'd always held on to hope that our bond could be rekindled. Diana arrived at precisely 7 o'clock, her timing unusually punctual for someone who typically ran 15 to 30 minutes late for everything. She stood on my front porch in a flowing bohemian dress, her long brown hair loose around her shoulders, carrying a large designer handbag that I didn't recognize. Despite our differences, I had to admit that Diana possessed a natural beauty that had always made heads turn. Her features were delicate but striking. Her smile could light up a room when she chose to use it, and she moved with a dancer's grace that made everything she did appear effortless. "Hey sis," she said, embracing me with what felt like genuine warmth. "Ready for the final fitting?" "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, ushering her inside. "Mom should be here soon with the seamstress." Diana wandered into my living room, her eyes scanning the space with an expression I couldn't quite read. Our home was comfortable but not extravagant. Marcus and I had chosen furniture and decorations that reflected our personalities rather than following expensive trends. Family photos covered the mantelpiece, books filled built-in shelves, and plants added life to every available surface. "Nice place," Diana commented, though something in her tone suggested the compliment wasn't entirely sincere. Federal agents must make good money. "We're comfortable," I said carefully, not wanting to get into specifics about our finances. "Can I get you something to drink?" "I have wine, coffee, or sparkling water." "Wine would be great," she said, settling onto our couch and continuing to look around with that same appraising gaze. I poured 2 glasses of Pinot Grigio and joined her in the living room. Diana seemed restless, her leg bouncing nervously as she sipped her wine and checked her phone repeatedly. This behavior wasn't entirely unusual for her. She'd always been somewhat hyperactive and easily distracted, but tonight something felt different. "How are things with Robert?" I asked, trying to make conversation while we waited for our mother. Diana's face brightened in a way that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, really good. He's working on this big business deal that could change everything for us. Import stuff from overseas, you know? Could be really lucrative." "That sounds interesting," I said, choosing my words carefully. "What kind of products?" "Just various things," Diana replied vaguely, waving her hand dismissively. "Electronics, accessories, specialty items. The profit margins are incredible if you know the right suppliers." Before I could ask follow-up questions, our mother arrived with Mrs. Chen, the seamstress from Elegant Bridal. Patricia burst through the door with her characteristic energy, carrying what appeared to be half the contents of a craft store, along with her wedding planning binder. "Girls, Mrs. Chen is here, and we need to get started immediately," she announced, kissing both Diana and me on the cheek. "The lighting in your bedroom will be perfect for the fitting." Mrs. Chen was a tiny woman in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and hands that moved with the precision of someone who'd spent decades working with delicate fabrics. She carried a small suitcase filled with pins, measuring tape, and various tailoring tools that she arranged on my dresser with methodical care. "Let's see this beautiful dress," she said with a warm smile and slight accent that hinted at her Chinese heritage. I led everyone upstairs to my bedroom, where the dress hung in all its vintage glory. Mrs. Chen approached it with the reverence of someone who understood the significance of heirloom garments, running her experienced fingers along the beadwork and examining the construction with professional interest. "This is exceptional work," she murmured. "The hand-stitching is perfect, and the silk has aged beautifully. Your great-grandmother was a true artist." Patricia beamed with pride. "It's been preserved so carefully all these years. Yessa's grandmother stored it in acid-free tissue paper in a cedar chest, and we've had it professionally cleaned and pressed." Diana moved closer to examine the dress, reaching out to touch the delicate lace sleeves. "It really is gorgeous," she said, and for a moment I heard genuine appreciation in her voice. "You're so lucky to have something with this much history." "I know," I agreed, feeling emotional as I always did when contemplating wearing the dress. "Sometimes I can hardly believe I get to be the next woman in our family to wear it." Mrs. Chen helped me into the dress with practiced efficiency, her skilled hands managing the tiny pearl buttons and intricate lacing system. The fabric felt cool and smooth against my skin, and as she adjusted the fit, I caught sight of myself in the full-length mirror. The transformation was remarkable. I looked like a bride, like someone ready to make the most important commitment of her life. "Oh, honey," Patricia whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "You look absolutely perfect." Diana stood behind our mother, her expression unreadable as she studied my reflection. "You really do," she said quietly. "Marcus is going to lose his mind when he sees you." Mrs. Chen worked with silent concentration, pinning areas that needed minor adjustments and marking points where the bustle would attach for the reception. The fitting process was meticulous but soothing, the seamstress's gentle hands and professional demeanor making me feel confident that every detail would be perfect. "The hemline needs to come up just half an inch," Mrs. Chen announced, kneeling to pin the appropriate length, "and we'll take in the waist by perhaps 3/4 of an inch on each side. The fit is already quite good." As Mrs. Chen worked, Patricia kept up a steady stream of commentary about wedding logistics, vendor confirmations, and timeline adjustments. Diana listened with apparent interest, asking questions about flower arrangements and seating charts that surprised me with their level of detail. "Who's handling security for the event?" Diana asked suddenly, a question that seemed to come from nowhere. "Security?" Patricia looked puzzled. "It's a backyard wedding with 50 guests. What kind of security would we need?" "I just thought with Marcus being FBI and all, maybe there would be some kind of protection considerations," Diana said with a shrug. "You know, making sure his work doesn't create any safety issues." "Marcus doesn't work on anything that would put us at risk," I said firmly. "His cases involve financial crimes and corporate fraud, not dangerous criminals or national security threats." Diana nodded, but I noticed she seemed to file this information away with the same calculating expression she'd worn while examining our living room earlier. Something about her questions felt off, though I couldn't pinpoint exactly what was bothering me. The fitting concluded successfully, with Mrs. Chen promising to have all alterations completed within the week. As she packed up her tools and prepared to leave, she gave me a warm smile and assured me that the dress would be absolutely perfect for my special day. After Mrs. Chen and our mother left, Diana lingered in my bedroom, helping me carefully hang the dress back on its padded hanger and arranging the train to prevent wrinkles. Her movements were gentle and reverent, and for a moment I felt like we were children again, playing dress-up in our grandmother's closet. "I can't wait to see you walk down the aisle," Diana said softly, adjusting the dress's position one final time. "You're going to be the most beautiful bride." "Thank you," I replied, touched by what seemed like genuine sisterly affection. "It means so much to have you there with me." Diana hugged me tightly, and I caught a whiff of unfamiliar perfume, something expensive and sophisticated that didn't match her usual preference for lighter, more bohemian scents. When she pulled away, her eyes were bright with what looked like unshed tears. "I should probably get going," she said, glancing at her phone. "Robert's picking me up soon, and we have dinner plans." After Diana left, I stood alone in my bedroom, gazing at the dress and feeling a complex mixture of emotions. The fitting had gone perfectly, our mother was in her element with wedding preparations, and Diana had seemed more engaged and supportive than she'd been in months. Yet something nagged at me, a subtle feeling that I couldn't quite identify or dismiss. I called Marcus to share the success of the evening's fitting, describing Mrs. Chen's skilled work and my mother's emotional reaction to seeing me in the completed ensemble. His voice carried that warm affection that never failed to make me smile, along with genuine interest in every detail of our wedding preparations. "I wish I could have been there to see you," he said, and I could hear the regret in his voice. "But tradition dictates that I wait until our wedding day, right?" "Absolutely," I laughed. "No peeking allowed. You'll just have to trust me that it's going to be worth the wait." "I already know it will be," Marcus said softly. "You could wear a burlap sack and still be the most beautiful woman I've ever seen." After we hung up, I went through my evening routine, washing my face, brushing my teeth, and changing into comfortable pajamas. But as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the familiar sounds of our neighborhood settling into nighttime quiet, that nagging feeling persisted. Something about Diana's behavior, her questions, her unusual punctuality, and that expensive handbag I didn't recognize kept circling through my mind. I told myself I was being paranoid, that pre-wedding stress was making me overthink innocent interactions. Diana had been nothing but supportive and helpful throughout the evening. Her questions about security and Marcus's work could easily be attributed to natural curiosity about my fiancé's career. The expensive accessories might be gifts from Robert or purchases made during one of her impulsive shopping sprees. But as I finally drifted off to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that something important had happened that evening. Something I'd missed or misinterpreted. In my dreams, I saw Diana's calculating expression as she examined my home, heard her voice asking those oddly specific questions, and felt again that brief moment when her hug had seemed more like goodbye than goodnight. The next morning started like any other, with Marcus leaving early for a multi-agency task force meeting and me preparing for another day of teaching. But as I reached for my coffee mug, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The spare key that we kept hanging on a small hook inside our kitchen cabinet was missing. I stared at the empty hook for several long moments, trying to remember if either Marcus or I had used it recently. We rarely needed the spare key since we both had our regular keys and knew each other's schedules well enough to coordinate our comings and goings. I searched through the obvious places where we might have absent-mindedly placed it: the kitchen counter, the entry table, Marcus's desk in our home office. A growing sense of unease settled in my stomach as I tried to rationalize its disappearance. Maybe Marcus had taken it for some reason and forgotten to mention it. Maybe I'd moved it myself during my wedding-related organizing frenzy and simply couldn't remember where I'd put it. At school, I found myself distracted during my first period class, mechanically guiding students through their perspective drawing exercises while my mind kept returning to that empty hook. During my lunch break, I called Marcus at his office, trying to keep my voice casual and light. "Hey, did you happen to take our spare house key for any reason?" I asked, stirring my yogurt without really tasting it. "No. Why?" His response was immediate and concerned. "Is something wrong?" "It's probably nothing," I said, though my instincts were telling me otherwise. "I just noticed it wasn't where we usually keep it. I'm sure I just misplaced it somewhere." Marcus was quiet for a moment, and I could almost hear his investigative mind processing this information. "When did you last remember seeing it there?" I thought back, trying to pinpoint the last time I'd actually noticed the key hanging on its hook. "I'm not sure. Maybe a week ago, when I was looking for the spare garage door opener." "I'll come home early today and we can look for it together," Marcus said, his voice carrying that protective tone that appeared whenever he sensed potential trouble. "And Yessa? If anything feels off or unusual, trust your instincts, okay?" The rest of my school day dragged by with agonizing slowness. Every normal sound in the hallway made me jump. Every parent volunteer who entered my classroom got a second glance. Every phone call to the main office made my heart race. I was being ridiculous, I told myself. A misplaced key didn't constitute a crisis. There were dozens of innocent explanations for its disappearance. When I arrived home that afternoon, I immediately went upstairs to check on the wedding dress. Relief flooded through me as I saw it hanging exactly where I'd left it, the plastic garment bag pristine and undisturbed. I ran my hands along the outside of the bag, checking for any signs of tampering, but everything appeared normal. The dress was safe, beautiful, and waiting for its moment to shine in less than 3 weeks. Marcus arrived home an hour early, his usual calm demeanor, slightly tense with concern. He was still in his work clothes, dark suit, crisp white shirt, and the conservative tie I'd bought him for his birthday, but he'd loosened his collar and rolled up his sleeves, ready to conduct a thorough investigation of our home. "Show me exactly where the key was," he said, following me into the kitchen. I opened the cabinet and pointed to the small brass hook that now sat empty. Marcus examined the hook carefully, then methodically searched the entire cabinet, removing items and checking behind and under everything. His movements were systematic and professional, the same approach he used when processing crime scenes or searching for evidence. "Nothing seems disturbed in here," he said, replacing the last of the spice jars. "Let's check the rest of the house room by room." We spent the next hour going through every space in our home, looking for signs of entry or disturbance. Marcus's trained eye caught details I would have missed: a slight shift in the position of items on his desk, a drawer that wasn't quite closed all the way, small indications that someone had been moving through our space. Nothing was missing, nothing was obviously out of place, but the cumulative effect of these tiny discrepancies painted a disturbing picture. "Someone was definitely here," Marcus concluded as we finished our sweep in the living room. "They were careful, professional even, but there are signs if you know what to look for." My heart sank as the reality of the situation hit me. Who would break into our house without taking anything? What were they looking for? Marcus sat down heavily on our couch, running his hands through his dark hair in a gesture of frustration I'd come to recognize. Could be surveillance, gathering information about our routines, our security measures, valuable items. Or they could have been looking for something specific. Like what? Information about my work? Case files if I brought any home, personal details they could use for identity theft or fraud. His green eyes met mine with serious intensity. Or they could have been casing the place for a future theft. The word, theft, made my stomach clench with anxiety. You don't think they were after the wedding dress, do you? It's valuable, historically speaking, and it would be devastating to lose, but it's not worth enough money to justify breaking into someone's house. Probably not, Marcus agreed, but let's move it somewhere more secure just to be safe. My parents have a safety deposit box at their bank that they've offered to let us use for wedding-related valuables. That evening, as we carefully transported my great-grandmother's dress to the bank, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were closing the barn door after the horse had already escaped. The violation of our home felt deeply personal, even though nothing had been taken. Someone had walked through our private spaces, touched our belongings, and invaded the sanctuary that Marcus and I had created together. Over the next few days, the mysterious break-in remained at the forefront of my thoughts, but life continued with its normal rhythms. Marcus increased our home security, installing additional locks and a more sophisticated alarm system. I threw myself into wedding preparations with renewed vigor, as if keeping busy could distract me from the nagging worry that something was fundamentally wrong. Diana called me twice that week, both conversations feeling strangely formal and stilted. She asked detailed questions about wedding logistics that surprised me with their specificity. What time would I be getting dressed? Where would the bridal party be preparing? What time would the ceremony actually begin? When I asked why she needed such precise information, she claimed she wanted to coordinate her arrival and make sure she didn't interfere with any professional photography. "I just want everything to be perfect for you," she said during our second conversation, her voice carrying an odd undertone I couldn't identify. "This is your special day, and I want to make sure I'm exactly where I need to be when I need to be there." Her sudden attention to detail was so uncharacteristic that I mentioned it to Marcus over dinner on Thursday night. He listened carefully as I described Diana's questions, his expression growing increasingly serious as I recounted the specifics of our conversations. "That level of detail about timing and locations isn't normal curiosity," he said, setting down his fork and giving me his full attention. "It sounds more like someone gathering intelligence for operational planning." "Operational planning?" I laughed nervously. "This is my sister we're talking about, not some criminal mastermind. She's disorganized and flighty, not calculating and strategic." Marcus reached across the table and took my hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on my palm. I know this is hard to consider, but my training has taught me to pay attention to patterns and anomalies. The break-in, the missing key, Diana's unusual behavior, her specific questions about wedding logistics. Separately, these might be coincidences. Together, they suggest something more concerning. I wanted to argue with him, to defend my sister and dismiss his suspicions as professional paranoia. But deep down, I was starting to recognize the same patterns he was seeing. Diana's behavior had been odd lately. Her sudden interest in our financial situation, her vague answers about Robert's business activities, and now these detailed questions about wedding timing. Friday afternoon brought an unexpected call from Mrs. Chen at the bridal boutique. Her usually cheerful voice sounded strained and apologetic as she delivered news that made my knees weak. "Miss Patterson? I'm calling because there's been a problem with your dress. Someone came to the shop this morning claiming to be you, saying there had been a family emergency and you needed to pick up the dress immediately." "What?" I gripped the phone tighter, my free hand pressed against my chest where my heart was hammering. "But the dress isn't at your shop. It's in a safety deposit box at the bank." "Yes, that's what I told this person. I explained that you had picked up the dress earlier in the week for safekeeping. But she was very insistent, very upset, claiming that she was your sister and that you had sent her to collect it." My mouth went dry. What did this person look like? Young woman, late 20s, brown hair, very pretty. She had identification with the name Diana Patterson and knew specific details about the dress, the beadwork, the family history, even some of the alteration notes from your fitting. I closed my eyes, feeling sick to my stomach. "What did you tell her?" "I told her the truth, that the dress wasn't here and that any changes to pickup arrangements would need to come directly from you with proper verification." She became quite agitated and left quickly when I suggested she should call you to clarify the situation. After hanging up with Mrs. Chen, I sat in my empty classroom trying to process what I'd just learned. Diana had attempted to collect my wedding dress under false pretenses, using information that only someone at the fitting would have known. The pieces of the puzzle were clicking together in a way that made me feel physically ill. I called Marcus immediately, my voice shaking as I relayed Mrs. Chen's information. He listened without interruption, his breathing becoming heavier as I described Diana's failed attempt to retrieve the dress. "I'm coming to get you right now," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Don't go anywhere alone, don't talk to Diana if she calls, and don't mention this conversation to anyone until we can figure out what's going on." The drive home passed in tense silence, both of us lost in our own thoughts about the implications of Diana's actions. Marcus's jaw was set in that determined line that appeared when he was working a case, his hands gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity. I stared out the passenger window, watching familiar neighborhoods blur past while my mind raced through memories of recent interactions with my sister, looking for clues I might have missed. At home, Marcus immediately began making phone calls to colleagues, his voice professional, and clipped as he described the situation and requested assistance with background checks and surveillance. I listened from the kitchen, hearing fragments of conversation about financial records, known associates, and potential criminal connections. "Robert Chen," Marcus was saying into his phone, "Diana Patterson's boyfriend. We need everything you can find on him. Real name, criminal history, current activities, known associates, and run Diana Patterson as well, date of birth." He rattled off my sister's personal information with the efficiency of someone accustomed to conducting investigations. While Marcus worked his professional contacts, I tried calling Diana's phone multiple times, each call going straight to voicemail. Her cheerful recorded message, asking callers to leave their name and number, felt like a mockery given what I now suspected about her recent activities. "Diana, it's Yessa," I said after the fifth unanswered call. "I know you tried to pick up my dress today. I know you were at Mrs. Chen's shop. I need you to call me back immediately and explain what's going on." Marcus appeared in the kitchen doorway just as I was hanging up, his expression grim but focused. "I've got agents running background checks on both Diana and Robert. Initial results should be available within the hour." "What do you think is really happening here?" I asked, though part of me was afraid to hear his answer. Marcus sat down across from me at our kitchen table, the same table where we'd shared coffee and wedding planning discussions just days earlier. His green eyes were serious but gentle, the look of someone who cared about me deeply but couldn't sugarcoat difficult truths. Based on what we know so far, I think Diana and Robert are involved in some kind of scheme that involves your wedding dress. It could be a simple theft for resale value, but given the level of planning and surveillance, I suspect something more sophisticated. Like what? Identity theft, fraud, using your dress and wedding as cover for some other criminal activity. Or they could be planning to steal it and hold it for ransom, knowing how much emotional value it has for you and our family. The thought of my great-grandmother's dress being used as leverage in some criminal scheme made me feel nauseous. But she's my sister. She was there for the fitting. She seemed so genuinely happy for me. How could she plan something like this? Marcus reached across the table and took my hands in his touch warm and reassuring despite the circumstances. People can compartmentalize, especially when they're desperate or under pressure. Diana might genuinely care about you while still being willing to betray you if she's in some kind of trouble. His phone rang, interrupting our conversation. Marcus answered with his professional tone, listening intently to whoever was on the other end. I watched his expression grow darker as the conversation continued, his free hand taking notes on a pad of paper. "Thank you," he said finally. "Yes, continue monitoring and let me know if there are any new developments." He hung up and looked at me with an expression that combined sympathy and anger. Robert Chen's real name is Robert Liu. He has an extensive criminal history: fraud, forgery, identity theft, and conspiracy charges. He's currently under investigation by multiple agencies for running sophisticated scams targeting wealthy individuals and families. The room seemed to spin around me as I processed this information. And Diana? No criminal record, but financial records show she's in serious debt. Credit cards maxed out, student loans in default, rent payments behind. She's in exactly the kind of desperate situation that makes people vulnerable to criminals like Robert. I put my head in my hands, feeling overwhelmed by the betrayal and manipulation. My own sister, someone I'd trusted and loved despite our differences, had been planning to steal from me. Worse, she'd brought a career criminal into our family circle, potentially exposing all of us to danger. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice muffled by my hands. "We document everything, continue gathering evidence, and prepare for whatever they're planning next," Marcus said firmly. "And we make sure that dress stays secure until after the wedding." That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling while Marcus slept fitfully beside me. Every small sound made me tense. Every shadow outside our bedroom window looked suspicious. The home that had felt like a safe haven just a week ago now felt vulnerable and exposed. Somewhere out there, my sister was planning something that could devastate our wedding and destroy a family heirloom that connected me to 3 generations of women who had loved and been loved. I thought about calling my parents, warning them about Diana's activities and Robert's criminal background. But without concrete proof of criminal intent, the accusations would sound like jealousy or pre-wedding stress. Diana was their daughter too, and they deserved to hear her side of the story before I destroyed their image of their youngest child. The next morning brought another disturbing development. Marcus discovered that someone had been conducting online searches about our home address, his work schedule, and even details about his FBI unit. The digital footprints were sophisticated, but traceable to someone with basic knowledge of computer systems and a strong motivation to gather intelligence. Whoever's doing this knows enough about technology to cover their tracks partially, but not enough to avoid detection by federal monitoring systems. Marcus explained, as he showed me the search logs on his laptop. It's consistent with someone being coached by a more experienced criminal. "Robert," I said, the name tasting bitter in my mouth. "Almost certainly. He's using Diana's access to our family and her knowledge of our routines to plan something. The question is whether it's a simple theft or something more complex." The answer came sooner than we expected. That afternoon, while I was grading student artwork in my classroom, my mother called with news that made my blood freeze. "Yessa, the strangest thing has happened," Patricia said, her voice confused and worried. "Diana called this morning and said you'd asked her to pick up your wedding dress from the bank because you needed it for an emergency fitting. She said the seamstress had found a problem with one of the alterations and needed to fix it immediately. Mom, please tell me you didn't give her the bank information." Well, she seemed so upset, and she knew all the details about Mrs. Chen's concerns. She said you'd tried to call me but couldn't reach me, so you'd asked her to handle it as your maid of honor. My heart sank. Diana isn't my maid of honor, Mom. Helen is my maid of honor. And there's no emergency with the dress. Oh no! Patricia's voice became small and frightened. Oh, Yessa, what have I done? I closed my eyes, feeling the last piece of my family's trust shatter. Did you give her the bank information? I gave her the safety deposit box number and told her which bank. But she would need your signature and identification to access it, wouldn't she? Not if she has a forged power of attorney or fake identification, I said, already reaching for my car keys. Mom, I need you to call the bank immediately and tell them not to release anything to anyone except Marcus or me, regardless of what documentation they present. I called Marcus as I raced across town toward the bank, praying we weren't too late. His voice was tight with controlled fury as I explained my mother's conversation with Diana. I'm 10 minutes away from the bank, he said. I'll call ahead and have them lock down the box. If Diana's already there, we'll have her detained. The Bank of Oregon branch, where Marcus's parents kept their safety deposit box, was a stately building downtown, all marble floors and hushed professional atmosphere. I burst through the front doors just as Marcus arrived from the opposite direction, both of us moving with urgent purpose toward the customer service desk. We need to check on safety deposit box 447 immediately, Marcus said, showing his FBI credentials to the startled bank manager. There may have been an attempted unauthorized access. The manager, a middle-aged woman with silver hair and a professional demeanor, led us quickly to the vault area. I can check our access logs, she said, her fingers flying over a computer keyboard. Box 447 was accessed approximately 1 hour ago by a Diana Patterson. She presented what appeared to be valid identification and a notarized letter of authorization from Yessa Patterson. My legs nearly gave out. She got it. She actually got my dress. Marcus immediately got on his phone, calling his FBI colleagues to report the theft and issue alerts for Diana and Robert. I stood in the sterile bank vault, surrounded by hundreds of metal boxes containing other people's valuables, and felt completely violated. My great-grandmother's wedding dress, the centerpiece of my upcoming ceremony, was gone. We'll find it, Marcus said firmly, wrapping his arms around me as I finally broke down crying. And we'll make sure they face consequences for what they've done. But as we left the bank and drove home through the busy Portland afternoon traffic, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Diana had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and whatever came next would change our family forever. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of police reports, FBI interviews, and devastating revelations that shattered everything I thought I knew about my sister. Marcus transformed from loving fiancé to federal agent, his professional demeanor taking over as he coordinated with multiple law enforcement agencies to track down Diana and Robert. I watched him work with a mixture of gratitude and heartbreak, knowing that while his skills might recover my dress, nothing could repair the damage to my family. Marcus set up a command center in our home office, multiple phones ringing constantly as agents reported their findings. The investigation moved with frightening efficiency, each new piece of information painting a darker picture of Diana's involvement with Robert and his criminal network. I learned terms I'd never wanted to understand: wire fraud, identity theft, organized crime syndicate, racketeering conspiracy. Robert Liu, also known as Robert, Chen, Bobby Chang, and at least 6 other aliases. Agent Thompson, Marcus's colleague, explained during a briefing at our kitchen table. He's been running sophisticated cons for over 5 years, targeting families with valuable heirlooms, jewelry, and collectibles. His method is always the same: infiltrate the family through a romantic relationship, gather intelligence about valuable items, then execute thefts using inside information. I sat numbly at the table where Marcus and I had shared so many morning coffees, trying to process the fact that my sister had been dating a career criminal who specialized in exactly the kind of theft he'd just committed against our family. How long has he been planning this? Based on financial records and communication patterns, probably since shortly after Diana started dating him 6 months ago. Agent Thompson continued, consulting his tablet. Her debt problems made her an ideal target for recruitment. Leo likely promised to solve her financial troubles in exchange for access to your family. Marcus leaned forward, his jaw tight with controlled anger. What about the dress? Any leads on where they might have taken it? We're tracking several possibilities. Leo has connections to high-end fencing operations that specialize in unique items, like vintage clothing and jewelry. There's also a black market for wedding dresses, particularly ones with historical value and provenance. The thought of my great-grandmother's dress being sold to strangers made me physically ill. Would they really sell it? It's not worth enough money to justify this level of planning and risk. Agent Thompson exchanged a meaningful look with Marcus before answering. The dress itself might not be the primary target. Leo's operation often uses stolen heirlooms as leverage for larger schemes, insurance fraud, ransom demands, or as collateral for other criminal activities. Ransom? I felt my blood pressure spike. You think they might try to extort money from us? It's possible, Marcus said carefully. The emotional value of the dress makes it perfect leverage. They know you'd pay almost anything to get it back, especially with the wedding so close. As if summoned by our conversation, my phone rang with an unknown number. Marcus immediately gestured for silence while Agent Thompson activated recording equipment. My hands shook as I answered the call, putting it on speaker as instructed. Yessa? Diana's voice sounded small and frightened, nothing like the confident woman who had hugged me after the dress fitting just days earlier. I need to talk to you. Where are you? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. And where is my dress? I can't tell you where I am, but I need you to listen carefully. Things have gotten complicated, and I'm in trouble. Marcus was already signaling to Agent Thompson, who was furiously typing on his laptop, attempting to trace the call. I forced myself to focus on Diana's voice, listening for background sounds or clues about her location. What kind of trouble, Diana? And why did you steal my wedding dress? It wasn't supposed to happen like this, Diana said, her voice breaking with what sounded like genuine distress. Robert said it would just be temporary, that we'd return it after using it for some kind of business deal. But now he's saying things that don't make sense, and I'm scared. What kind of business deal involves stealing a 70-year-old wedding dress? I don't know. Diana's voice rose to near hysteria. He told me it was collateral for an investment opportunity, something about proving we had access to valuable items. But now he's talking about selling it, and there are other people involved, dangerous people. Marcus leaned closer to the phone, his FBI training taking over. Diana, this is Marcus. You need to tell us exactly where you are right now. We can protect you, but only if you cooperate with us. I can't, Diana sobbed. Robert says if I contact law enforcement, he'll make sure I take the blame for everything. He has photos, recordings, evidence that makes it look like this was all my idea. Agent Thompson was making urgent hand gestures, indicating that the trace was nearly complete. Marcus nodded and continued talking, trying to keep Diana on the line. Diana, Robert is using you. He's a career criminal with multiple convictions. Whatever he's threatened you with, we can protect you if you help us recover the dress and arrest him. You don't understand, Diana said desperately. It's not just Robert anymore. There are other people. People with guns. They're talking about using the dress for something bigger, some kind of insurance scam involving fake accidents and fraud claims. The line went dead. Agent Thompson looked up from his laptop with grim satisfaction. Got it. The call originated from a motel on the east side of Portland. Units are already en route. Marcus was already reaching for his service weapon and badge. I'm going with them. No, I said firmly, surprising myself with the strength in my voice. This is my sister and my dress. I'm coming too. Absolutely not, Marcus replied, his protective instincts overriding his usual respect for my independence. This is now an active federal investigation involving armed suspects. You'll stay here where it's safe. She's my sister, I repeated, standing up and grabbing my jacket. She called me, not you. Maybe I can get through to her in a way that law enforcement can't. Agent Thompson looked between Marcus and me, clearly uncomfortable with the domestic drama unfolding in the middle of his investigation. Ma'am, I appreciate your concern, but civilian involvement in active operations. I'm not a civilian in this situation, I interrupted. I'm the victim of the crime. and the only family member Diana might trust right now. If you want her cooperation in testifying against Robert and his associates, you need me there." Marcus ran his hands through his hair, a gesture of frustration I'd come to recognize. His federal agent training was warring with his love for me and his understanding of family dynamics. Finally, he sighed and looked at Agent Thompson. "She stays in the vehicle, minimum safe distance, and only if Diana specifically requests to speak with her." The East Side Motel was exactly the kind of place where people went to disappear. Run down, cash only, with broken neon signs and an atmosphere of desperation. FBI vehicles surrounded the building in a coordinated operation that looked like something from a television show, except the stakes were painfully real. I sat in the back of an unmarked SUV, watching through bulletproof glass as agents took positions around the motel room where Diana was reportedly staying. Marcus spoke into his radio, coordinating with the tactical team while keeping one eye on me. I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he held his weapon, the professional focus that transformed him from my loving fiancé into a federal law enforcement officer. This was a side of his work I'd never witnessed firsthand, and it was both impressive and terrifying. "We have movement in room 127, came a voice through the radio. "Two subjects visible through the window. One matches the description of Diana Patterson." "Any sign of the dress?" Marcus asked. "Negative on visual confirmation of the item." Requesting permission to approach. What followed was a textbook law enforcement operation, executed with precision and professionalism. Agents approached the room from multiple angles, while others secured the perimeter and escape routes. The tactical team used electronic surveillance equipment to monitor conversations inside the room, gathering evidence of criminal activity before making their move. Federal agents, "Open the door!" The command echoed across the motel parking lot, followed by the sound of splintering wood as the door was breached. Through the radio chatter, I heard fragments of the arrest. Diana screaming, a man's voice shouting threats, the systematic clearing of the room to ensure no weapons or additional suspects were present. My heart pounded as I waited for news about my sister's condition and the location of my dress. "Two subjects in custody," came the report. "Diana Patterson and Robert Liu secured without incident. Continuing search for the stolen item." Marcus jogged back to our vehicle, his expression a mixture of relief and continued concern. "Diana's asking for you," he said, opening my door. "She says she'll only tell us where the dress is if she can speak with you directly." "Is she hurt?" "No, just scared and crying." "But Yessa, you need to understand that anything she tells you could be used as evidence in a federal prosecution. This isn't just a family conversation anymore." I nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. As we walked across the parking lot toward the motel room, I tried to prepare myself for seeing Diana in handcuffs, for confronting the sister who had betrayed me so completely. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows between the FBI vehicles, and I could see curious neighbors gathering at the edge of the police perimeter. Diana sat in the back of an FBI van, her hands cuffed behind her back, her makeup smeared from crying. She looked younger than her 28 years, vulnerable and frightened in a way that reminded me of the little sister I'd protected from playground bullies and childhood nightmares. For a moment, my anger was overwhelmed by a surge of protective love that caught me completely off guard. "Yessa," Diana sobbed when she saw me. "I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to go this far." I sat down across from her in the van, Marcus standing nearby but giving us space to talk. "Where is my dress, Diana?" "I don't know," she said, fresh tears streaming down her face. "Robert took it yesterday and said he was keeping it somewhere safe until the deal was finished. He wouldn't tell me where." "What deal? What was supposed to happen?" Diana's story came out in fragments between sobs and apologies. Robert had approached her months ago, presenting himself as a successful businessman who could help solve her financial problems. He'd gradually drawn her into his confidence, learning about our family's background and resources. When he learned about the wedding dress and its historical significance, he'd convinced her that borrowing it temporarily could serve as collateral for a lucrative business opportunity. "He said we'd return it before the wedding," Diana explained. "He said you'd never even know it was gone, and I'd be able to pay off all my debts with the money we'd make from the deal. But that's not what happened." "No," Diana's voice dropped to a whisper. Once we had the dress, Robert started talking about other plans: insurance fraud, selling it to collectors, using it as leverage for bigger crimes. When I tried to back out, he showed me all the evidence he'd collected: photos of me taking the dress, recordings of our conversations, forged documents with my signature. He said if I didn't cooperate, he'd make sure I took the blame for everything. Marcus stepped closer, his notebook out as he documented Diana's confession. Diana, I need you to tell us everything you know about Robert's associates, his business operations, and any other crimes he might be planning. There are others, Diana said, looking terrified. People who scared even Robert. They were talking about using the dress as part of some bigger insurance scam, staging fake accidents or thefts to collect money from multiple policies. Do you know where they might have taken the dress? Robert mentioned a warehouse near the airport, someplace where they store things before shipping them out of state, but I was never there, and I don't know the exact location. Agent Thompson appeared at the van door, his expression urgent. We need to move on this information quickly. If they're planning to transport the dress out of state, we could lose jurisdiction and any chance of recovery. The next few hours blurred together as the FBI launched a coordinated effort to locate the warehouse and intercept the dress before it could be moved or sold. Diana provided additional details about Robert's associates and their methods, information that painted a picture of a sophisticated criminal network operating across multiple states. I found myself in the strange position of being both victim and key witness in a federal investigation. FBI agents interviewed me repeatedly about my interactions with Diana and Robert, looking for any detail that might provide leads about their operation. The personal betrayal had become a matter of national law enforcement interest, with implications far beyond my stolen wedding dress. The dress is likely being held with other stolen goods in what we call a cooling-off facility, Agent Thompson explained during one of our briefings. Criminal organizations use these warehouses to store stolen items until law enforcement attention dies down, then move them to buyers or fencing operations. How long does that usually take? Anywhere from a few days to several months, depending on the heat level and the value of the items. But given that your wedding is next week, they might accelerate their timeline to capitalize on your desperation. Marcus worked tirelessly with his colleagues, following leads and coordinating with other federal agencies to track down the warehouse. His professional network proved invaluable, as agents across the region joined the search for my dress and the criminal operation that had stolen it. On the third day after Diana's arrest, Marcus received a call that made him grab his jacket and head for the door. They found it, he said, his voice tight with controlled excitement. The warehouse, the dress, everything. Can I come? Not to the actual raid, but you can wait nearby. If we recover the dress, you'll need to identify it and provide victim impact statements for the prosecution. The warehouse was located in an industrial district near Portland International Airport, a nondescript building surrounded by similar structures housing legitimate businesses. FBI vehicles had surrounded the area, with agents preparing for what they hoped would be the final phase of the operation. I waited in an FBI command vehicle, watching through monitors as agents prepared to execute search warrants on the warehouse. The operation was methodical and professional, with teams assigned to different sections of the building to ensure nothing was missed or destroyed. Breaching now, quote, came the radio report, followed by the sounds of doors being forced open and agents shouting commands. Multiple suspects in custody, another voice reported. Significant quantities of stolen goods recovered, including vintage clothing and jewelry. My heart raced as I waited for specific news about my dress. Minutes felt like hours as agents systematically searched the warehouse, documenting evidence and securing items for return to their rightful owners. We've got it! Marcus's voice came through the radio, filled with relief and satisfaction. The wedding dress is here, appears to be in good condition. I closed my eyes and felt tears of relief streaming down my face. My great-grandmother's dress, the symbol of love and commitment that connected me to 3 generations of women in my family, had been recovered. But as Marcus returned to the command vehicle, carrying a familiar garment bag, I realized that while the dress might be physically intact, the vie accessoire Emotional damage from Diana's betrayal would take much longer to heal. "It's beautiful," Marcus said softly, unzipping the bag to reveal the pristine condition of the vintage silk and lace. "And it's going to look perfect on you next week." I reached out to touch the delicate fabric, running my fingers over the hand-sewn beadwork that my great-grandmother had created with such care and love. The dress was exactly as I remembered it, unchanged by its ordeal in criminal hands. But I felt changed by the experience, hardened by the knowledge of what my own sister had been willing to do for money. "What happens to Diana now?" I asked, though part of me wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Marcus's expression grew serious. "She's facing federal charges for theft, conspiracy, and fraud. The prosecution will consider her cooperation in testifying against Robert and his associates, but she's still looking at significant prison time. And Robert? Multiple felony charges, organized crime enhancements, likely decades in federal prison. The investigation Diana helped us with has exposed a criminal network that's been operating for years." As we drove home with my recovered dress safely secured in the back seat, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Relief that the dress had been found, satisfaction that justice was being served, but also profound sadness about the destruction of my relationship with Diana. The sister I thought I knew had been willing to steal from me, to risk my wedding and my happiness for the promise of easy money. The wedding dress was safe, but everything else about my family had been irreversibly changed. In 1 week, I would walk down the aisle wearing my great-grandmother's dress, but Diana would not be there to witness it. Instead, she would be in federal custody, awaiting trial for crimes that had shattered our family's trust and unity. That night, I hung the dress in our bedroom closet, exactly where it had been before this nightmare began. Marcus held me as I cried for the sister I had lost, not to death or distance, but to choices that had revealed a side of her character I'd never suspected existed. The dress was back where it belonged, but the innocence and trust that had once defined our family relationships were gone forever. The federal courthouse in downtown Portland felt imposing and cold as I walked through the metal detectors, my heels clicking against the marble floors with an echo that seemed to announce my presence to everyone in the building. Marcus walked beside me, his hand resting protectively on my lower back, his FBI credentials getting us through security checkpoints that would have delayed ordinary citizens. Today was the day Robert Liu would face sentencing for his crimes, and I was scheduled to deliver a victim impact statement that would help determine how many years he would spend in federal prison. Agent Thompson met us in the hallway outside the courtroom, carrying a thick folder of evidence and wearing the satisfied expression of a law enforcement officer who had successfully dismantled a major criminal operation. Over the past month, the investigation had expanded far beyond my stolen wedding dress, uncovering a sophisticated network of fraudsters who had been targeting families across multiple states for over 3 years. "The prosecution is confident we'll get the maximum sentence," Agent Thompson said, his voice carrying the professional satisfaction of a job well done. Liu's operation was responsible for stealing over $2 million worth of heirlooms, jewelry, and collectibles from at least 40 families. "Your case was just the tip of the iceberg." I nodded, trying to process the magnitude of what Diana had inadvertently helped me uncover. My sister's desperate financial situation had made her vulnerable to Robert's manipulation, but her cooperation with law enforcement had ultimately brought down an entire criminal enterprise. It was a strange form of redemption that felt both meaningful and heartbreaking. "What about Diana?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I was ready for the answer. Her sentencing hearing is scheduled for next week. Given her cooperation and the fact that this was her first offense, the prosecution is recommending 18 months in federal prison with supervised release. She could be out in 12 months with good behavior. 18 months felt simultaneously like too much and not enough punishment for someone who had betrayed her own family. Part of me wanted Diana to face the full consequences of her choices, while another part of me mourned for the sister I'd lost and hoped she could eventually find a path to redemption. The courtroom was packed with other victims of Robert's schemes, their faces reflecting the same mixture of anger and violated trust that I felt every time I thought about Diana's betrayal. An elderly couple from Seattle, whose grandmother's ring had been stolen. A family from San Francisco who had lost a collection of vintage photographs with irreplaceable sentimental value. A woman about my age, whose great-grandfather's military medals had vanished during what she thought was a romantic relationship. As I listened to their stories during the preliminary proceedings, I realized how fortunate Marcus and I had been. His FBI training and connections had enabled us to recover my dress and catch the perpetrators within days. Many of these other families had been waiting months or even years for any kind of resolution, and some would never see their stolen heirlooms again. When my turn came to address the court, I stood at the podium and looked directly at Robert Liu, sitting at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit with his hands shackled. He appeared smaller and less intimidating than I remembered from the brief glimpses I'd had during his arrest. Without his expensive clothes and confident demeanor, he looked like what he truly was, a common criminal who preyed on trust and exploited human relationships for financial gain. "Your Honor," I began, my voice steadier than I had expected. "Robert Liu didn't just steal my wedding dress. He stole my trust in my own family, my sense of security in my own home, and my ability to believe that people can be who they claim to be." I described the violation of having my home invaded, the terror of discovering that someone I'd welcomed into my family was actually gathering intelligence for criminal purposes, and the devastation of learning that my own sister had been willing to betray me for money. But I also talked about the strength I'd found in facing these challenges, the way Marcus and I had grown closer through adversity, and my determination not to let Robert's crimes define my life or my relationships. "The dress he stole was more than fabric and thread," I continued, feeling my voice grow stronger with each word. "It represented the love and commitment of 3 generations of women in my family. While you were able to return the physical dress to me, the emotional violation of having it in criminal hands can never be undone." Judge Martinez listened intently as I spoke, occasionally taking notes and nodding at particularly significant points. She was a stern-looking woman in her 50s with silver hair and piercing brown eyes that seemed to see through any attempt at deception or manipulation. Her reputation for harsh sentences in cases involving organized crime was well known among the federal bar. The defendant's actions went far beyond simple theft, I concluded. He systematically destroyed trust within families, exploited vulnerable people like my sister, and created lasting emotional trauma for dozens of victims. I ask that you consider not just the monetary value of what was stolen, but the human cost of his crimes. Robert's defense attorney made a half-hearted attempt to argue for leniency, citing his client's difficult childhood and claims of rehabilitation, but the evidence against Robert was overwhelming, and his pattern of manipulating romantic partners to gain access to their families' valuables demonstrated a calculating cruelty that Judge Martinez clearly found reprehensible. "Mr. Liu," Judge Martinez said when she delivered her sentence, "you have shown a complete disregard for the bonds of trust that hold our society together. You exploited love, manipulated vulnerable people, and caused immeasurable emotional harm to dozens of families. The court sentences you to 25 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release." The gavel fell with a sharp crack that seemed to echo through the courtroom, followed by gasps from some of the victims and a small cheer from others. 25 years meant that Robert would be in his late 50s when he was released. His criminal career effectively ended, and his ability to manipulate others severely limited by his conviction record. As we left the courthouse, I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and emptiness. Justice had been served, but it couldn't undo the damage that had been done to my family. Diana was still facing her own sentencing hearing, my parents were struggling with shame and confusion about their daughter's choices, and I was left to navigate the complex emotions of loving someone who had betrayed me so completely. Marcus and I drove to a quiet restaurant overlooking the Willamette River, seeking privacy to process the day's events away from the intensity of the courthouse atmosphere. We sat by a window watching boats navigate the peaceful waters, both of us lost in our own thoughts about justice, forgiveness, and the complicated nature of family relationships. "How do you feel?" Marcus asked, reaching across the table to take my hand. "Relieved," I said, surprised by the honesty of my answer, "and sad, and angry, and grateful. I think I'm feeling everything at once." "That's normal," Marcus said gently. Closure doesn't always bring the peace we expect it to. Sometimes it just allows us to move forward with clarity about what happened. Over dinner, we talked about Diana's upcoming sentencing hearing and whether I should attend. Part of me wanted to see my sister face the consequences of her choices, while another part of me worried that my presence would only add to her humiliation and pain. She had already written me several letters from jail, expressing remorse and asking for forgiveness, but I hadn't been ready to respond to any of them. Whatever you decide about Diana, it should be based on what you need for your own healing, Marcus advised. Not what she needs, not what your parents want, but what will help you find peace with this situation. The next morning brought an unexpected phone call from my mother, her voice heavy with the weight of everything our family had endured over the past month. Patricia had aged visibly since Diana's arrest, the stress and shame of having a daughter in federal custody taking a toll on her normally vibrant demeanor. Diana's lawyer called, my mother said without preamble. She wants to know if you'll consider writing a letter to the judge asking for leniency in her sentencing. I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar tightness in my chest that accompanied any discussion of Diana's situation. What kind of letter? Something about how she was manipulated by Robert, how this was completely out of character for her, how she's already learned from this experience and doesn't deserve the full punishment the prosecution is seeking. Mom, she stole my wedding dress. She brought a career criminal into our family. She violated our trust in the most fundamental way possible. I know, Patricia said quietly. But she's still your sister. She's still my daughter. And she's genuinely sorry for what she did. Being sorry doesn't undo the damage. No, but it might be a starting point for healing. After hanging up with my mother, I spent the rest of the day thinking about forgiveness, justice, and the difference between the two concepts. Diana deserved to face consequences for her choices, but did she deserve the full weight of federal sentencing guidelines designed for career criminals? She had been manipulated and exploited, but she had also made conscious decisions to betray her own family. That evening, I made a decision that surprised even me. I sat down at my computer and began writing a letter to Judge Martinez, not asking for leniency for Diana, but asking for justice that took into account the full complexity of her situation. Your Honor, I wrote, my sister Diana made terrible choices that caused significant harm to our family. However, I believe her actions were the result of desperation and manipulation, rather than criminal intent. While I cannot excuse what she did, I hope the court will consider that she was a victim of Robert Liu's manipulation, as well as a perpetrator of crimes against our family. I described Diana's financial desperation, Robert's sophisticated manipulation techniques, and her immediate cooperation with law enforcement once she understood the true nature of his criminal enterprise. I didn't ask for Diana to escape punishment, but I asked for a sentence that would allow her to rebuild her life and make amends for the harm she had caused. Writing the letter felt like a form of therapy, allowing me to articulate my complex feelings about Diana's situation while maintaining appropriate boundaries about accountability and consequences. When I finished, I felt lighter somehow, as if I had finally found a way to balance my love for my sister with my need for justice. Marcus read the letter before I sent it, his expression thoughtful as he considered my words. This feels right, he said finally. You're not excusing what she did, but you're acknowledging that people are complex and that justice should account for that complexity. Diana's sentencing hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday, and I decided to attend, despite my conflicted feelings about seeing my sister in court. When the day arrived, I sat in the gallery watching as Diana stood before Judge Martinez in her orange jumpsuit, looking young and frightened, and nothing like the confident woman who had admired my wedding dress just weeks earlier. The judge had clearly read my letter, along with similar communications from my parents and several character witnesses who testified about Diana's essential goodness despite her terrible choices. When Judge Martinez delivered her sentence, 12 months in federal prison, followed by 2 years of supervised release and community service, I felt a sense of closure that had been missing since this ordeal began. As Diana was led away in handcuffs, she turned and looked at me with an expression of gratitude and sorrow that nearly broke my heart. We had a long way to go before our relationship could be repaired, if it ever could be, but at least justice had been served in a way that acknowledged both accountability and compassion. The federal law that Marcus had dedicated his career to upholding had worked exactly as it was designed to, protecting victims, holding criminals accountable, and ensuring that justice was both fair and proportional to the crimes committed. My wedding dress had been recovered, the criminal network had been dismantled, and my family could begin the long process of healing from betrayal and rebuilding trust. 6 months later, I stood in front of the mirror in our master bedroom, wearing my great-grandmother's wedding dress for the second time. The silk felt different against my skin now, weighted with the knowledge of everything it had survived. Marcus and I had postponed our original wedding date to deal with the criminal proceedings, but today we were finally ready to exchange the vows that had been delayed by Diana's betrayal. The dress looked exactly as it had during that first fitting, the hand-sewn beadwork catching the morning light with the same ethereal beauty that had taken my breath away months ago. But I felt transformed by everything we'd endured. The naive woman who had trusted blindly was gone, replaced by someone stronger and more discerning, someone who understood that love required both vulnerability and wisdom. Helen, my maid of honor, helped me with the final adjustments, her gentle hands arranging the train with the same reverence Mrs. Chen had shown during the alterations. My parents waited downstairs, their relationship with me forever changed by Diana's actions, but slowly healing through honest conversations about trust, boundaries, and forgiveness. "You look radiant," Helen said softly, stepping back to admire the complete ensemble. "And stronger than I've ever seen you." Through the bedroom window, I could see our backyard transformed into the garden paradise Marcus and I had envisioned. White chairs arranged in perfect rows, flowers blooming in carefully planned arrangements, an archway draped with silk and lace waiting for our ceremony. 50 guests had already arrived, people who had supported us through the darkest period of our relationship and were here to celebrate our resilience. Marcus waited at the altar in his dark suit, his green eyes bright with the same love and determination that had carried us through federal investigations and family trauma. Agent Thompson sat in the front row, having become more than a colleague during our ordeal. He was now a friend who understood how crime could strengthen rather than destroy the bonds between people. As I walked down the aisle on my father's arm, I thought about Diana, currently serving her sentence at a minimum security federal facility in Oregon. We had begun corresponding again, tentative letters that acknowledged the damage she had caused while exploring the possibility of eventual reconciliation. Forgiveness would take time, trust would need to be rebuilt slowly, but the door remained open for healing. The ceremony was everything we had dreamed it would be, intimate, meaningful, and filled with the presence of people who truly loved us. When Marcus lifted my veil and looked into my eyes, I saw reflected there all the challenges we had overcome, and all the adventures still waiting for us. "You saved more than just a dress," I whispered as we prepared to exchange rings. "You saved us." "We saved each other," Marcus replied, his voice steady and sure. "And we always will." The federal law that had seemed so abstract when Marcus first explained his work had become deeply personal, protecting our family and ensuring that justice prevailed over betrayal. Robert Liu would spend the next 2 decades in prison, his criminal network permanently dismantled. Diana would have a chance to rebuild her life, to learn from her mistakes, and to perhaps someday earn back the trust she had shattered. As we kissed as husband and wife, surrounded by the love of family and friends who had stood by us through crisis, I felt the weight of the past lifting away. The dress that connected me to 3 generations of women had survived another ordeal, carrying with it new stories of love, betrayal, redemption, and the power of justice to heal even the deepest wounds. Our first dance as a married couple took place on the same patio where Marcus had proposed, the same space where we had planned our future and weathered our storms. The dress flowed around us like a cloud, its vintage silk whispering stories of all the women who had worn it before me and all the dreams it had witnessed come true. That night, as I carefully hung the dress in our closet for what might be the last time, I knew its legacy was secure. Someday, perhaps, a daughter or niece would wear it at her own wedding, carrying forward the tradition of love and commitment that had sustained our family through even its darkest moments. Marcus wrapped his arms around me as we stood together in our bedroom, both of us still. amazed that we had made it through everything intact and stronger than before. Federal law had provided the framework for justice, but love had provided the foundation for healing. The dress would wait patiently in our closet, ready for the next generation of brides, carrying with it the knowledge that some things are worth fighting for, worth protecting, and worth preserving no matter what storms may come. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.